Hey guys, it's Mrs. Bolin again. Today we're going to go over angle relationships. So just some different kind of angles. You've already seen a few of these this year, so hopefully this is a little bit of review and should be pretty easy. So the things that we're going to go over today are adjacent angles, vertical angles, linear pairs, supplementary angles, and complementary angles. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of show you a few things and then we'll do a few problems of an assignment together. So adjacent angles are side by side and they share a common ray. This is the fancy definition, but really all it means is that they are literally touching. So because they share this ray right here, these two angles are touching, it makes them adjacent. They don't have to add up to anything, nothing fancy like that. As long as they are touching, they are adjacent. So these are all some examples of what adjacent angles can look like. So you can see that they are all different sizes. As long as they're touching, they are adjacent. Okay, now these are not adjacent. Do you see how these angles, they don't share this ray? They're not actually touching, so those are not adjacent. Same with these two angles right here where the numbers are. Now these two are adjacent, because they're right smack next to each other sharing this ray, but this one and this one are not adjacent because they don't share a ray. They're not right next to each other. Same thing over here. These two angles that are 35 degrees, they're not adjacent because they don't share the same two rays. They have to be right smack next to each other. Okay, the next thing we're going to look at are vertical angles. So when two lines intersect, just like that, they make vertical angles. One thing you'll notice is that vertical angles are congruent. They are the exact same measure. So you can see this angle and this angle, those are vertical angles. They are congruent. And then same thing here. Those two angles are also vertical and congruent. Okay, so that's just kind of showing you that they're opposite each other and that they are congruent. Another example, again, vertical angles are congruent. And now we're going to move on to supplementary angles. Supplementary angles add up to 180. And an easy way that you can remember that, supplementary starts with an S, and you can turn that S into an 8 for 180 degrees. So supplementary angles add up to 180. You can see here that if they are adjacent and supplementary, so if they are right smack next to each other and they add up to 180, they create a linear pair. Okay, they create a linear pair. Over here, 40 plus 140, that adds up to 180. So these are supplementary, but are they adjacent? They are not because they're not actually touching. So even though they're supplementary, they're not adjacent, so they are not a linear pair. They are only a linear pair if they are right smack next to each other, just like that. Complementary angles add up to 90 degrees. An easy way to remember this is if you draw a C for complementary, you can turn that into a 9 and make it 90 degrees. So complementary angles are any two angles that add up to 90 degrees. Now, complementary angles, even if they are adjacent, are not a linear pair. Linear pairs have to add up to 180 degrees. So these are adjacent and complementary because they add up to 90. These are not adjacent because they're not right smack next to each other, but they are complementary because they add up to 90. All right, so now let's look at this assignment that you should have. And we are going to go over a few problems together, and then you'll work on the rest on your own. So 1 through 8 just says to name the relationship: complementary, linear pair, vertical, or adjacent. So remember, linear pair just means that they add up to 180 degrees and they have to be touching. Complementary means that they add up to 90. Vertical means that they intersect. And adjacent means, bam, right smack next to each other, but it doesn't really matter what they add up to. Adjacent is just next to each other. So let's start with, let's do number 1. These are right smack next to each other, And anytime you have a straight line like this, it's going to add up to 180. This whole angle makes 180. So since they're adjacent and they add up to 180, that would be a linear pair. So if you'd like, you can put LP. Let's look at number 6. We're looking at angles A and B. So I know for one thing, they share this ray. So that makes them adjacent, but are they maybe complementary? Do you think that those add up to 90? Unless there's a little symbol like this telling you that they add up to 90, then you can't assume that they do. So these are definitely not vertical angles. They're definitely not a linear pair. They're not complementary, at least we can't prove it. So these are just adjacent. Okay, so you get the idea on those. Let's move down to 9 through 12. I'll give you a hint on number 10. These are vertical angles, which means that they are congruent. So maybe you can figure out what the measure of angle B is now that you know that those are congruent. Let's take a look at number 11. Zoom in for you. Anytime that you have a circle or angles that go all the way around in a circle, they're going to add up to 360 degrees. So we know that this is 209. We know that this is 96, but we need to figure out what B is. I know that all three of these angles added together should give me 360. So if I take them plus B and I set them equal to 360, then I can solve for B. Now, I don't have a calculator on me, so I'm going to let you finish that one off. Just solve for B. Also, be sure that when you solve for B, let's say on this one the answer was 12, and I honestly don't know what it is, you would put 12 degrees because it's an angle. Okay, but I really don't know what it is, so I'm going to scratch that out. Let's go to the back side. I will do 14 with you as well. So this little symbol right here, hopefully you've already seen this by now. That means 90 degrees. That's showing you that you have a right angle right there, and right angles are always 90 degrees. So I know that that whole thing is 90 degrees. I know that this little piece is 29, and I need to figure out what B is. So I know that if I add B and 29 together, I should get 90. So B plus 29 equals 90 degrees. I'll go ahead and solve that one with you. Let's build our wall. We need to isolate B, so we need to subtract 29 from both sides. So B equals 90 minus 29, I believe is 61. Hopefully that's correct. Put your degrees, and that would be your answer. All right, one more. We'll do 19 through 22. So, very similar. You are trying to find the value of x. Okay, trying to find the value of x. So, let's do 21 together. Actually, we'll do 19 and 21, and I'll just get you set up on both. So, again, you have a straight line. So you know every time you have a straight line, it's going to add up to 180 degrees. Okay? It's going to add up to 180. This angle over here is really just to throw you off. You don't even need it. So if I know that these two add, they combine to give me 180, my equation would look like this. 3x plus 18 plus 93 equals 180. And then you would just solve for x. Okay, let's do 21 as well. Hopefully you know your angles by now. These are vertical angles, which means they are congruent, which means that they are equal. So on these, remember, you're not combining anything. You're just setting them equal to each other. So you've got 2 plus 3x, which is equal to 62. you would just solve this for x. All right, guys, the rest of this is on your own, so good luck and get it done.